Hello, this is Terrence McNally. Happy Labor Day weekend. May the working people of this country survive the next few years without losing too much ground to the whims of a cruel madman and the greed of wannabe billionaires. This weekend marks the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. In the first half today, you'll hear my 2006 conversation with New Orleans' own best-selling historian Douglas Brinkley about his book, The Great Deluge. In it, he investigates the failures of government at every level and traces the character flaws, inexperience, and ulterior motives that allowed the Katrina disaster to devastate the Gulf Coast. And in the second half, no matter what the local jurisdictions may say, the start of September feels to me like the start of the school year. So you'll hear my 2005 conversation with National Teacher of the Year, Rafe Esquith. It was on the occasion of a PBS documentary celebrating his Hobart Shakespearians. At Hobart Elementary, one of the nation's largest inner-city grade schools, Esquith leads fifth graders through a challenging curriculum of English, mathematics, geography, literature, and at the end of the semester, every student, few for whom English is their first language, perform in a full-length Shakespeare play. Hello, I'm Terry McNally. Welcome to Free Forum. With everything else that is going on in the world right now, in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Iraq, I am still going to turn my attention today to what went on the Gulf Coast of the United States a little less than a year ago. We all remember in the span of 5 violent hours on August 29, 2005, Hurricane Katrina destroyed major cities and flattened 150 miles of coastline. And sadly, those wind-torn hours represented only the first stage of a relentless triple tragedy that Katrina brought to the Gulf Coast from Louisiana to Mississippi to Alabama. First came the hurricane, stage 1, one of the 3 strongest ever to make landfall in the United States, 150-mile-per-hour winds with gusts over 180. Second, the flooding, which submerged 500,000 homes, creating the largest domestic refugee crisis since the Civil War. 80% of New Orleans was underwater. Whole towns in southeastern Louisiana ceased to exist. Third, as cruel as the natural disaster itself, the human tragedy of government mismanagement. New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin implemented an evacuation plan that favored the rich and the healthy. Louisiana Governor Kathleen Blanco failed to provide real leadership in a time of fear and confusion, and, at least according to his boss, FEMA Director Michael Brown was doing a heck of a job. In The Great Deluge, best-selling author Douglas Brinkley, a New Orleans resident and professor of history at Tulane University, lets survivors tell their own stories of the nightmare that was Katrina. He investigates the failure of government at every level, traces the character flaws, the inexperience, the ulterior motives that allowed the Katrina disaster to devastate the Gulf Coast. Here on Free Forum, we explore the lives, the work, and the ideas of individuals that I suspect have pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. We look at new, innovative, provocative approaches to business, environment, health, science, politics, media, culture, all based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. Douglas Brinkley, professor of history, director of the Roosevelt Center at Tulane University, is contributing editor to Vanity Fair and American Heritage. 4 of his books were selected as New York Times Notable Books of the Year. His last 3, Tour of Duty, The Boys of Pointe du Hoc, and Parish Priest, were all New York Times bestsellers. Welcome, Douglas Brinkley, to Free Forum.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. I love this station.
All right. When he's in L.A., this is where he listens. I want listeners to get to know the people behind the work and the ideas. So you make the point very early on that The Great Deluge is not a memoir. It's not your personal story. It's an oral history in some sense of 5 days. But at the start, at least, tell us a bit about you and your family's personal experience of New Orleans and of Katrina.
Well, when you live in New Orleans, summers are hurricane seasons, and so when Katrina was brewing and you'd see this big blob on your Weather Channel screen or on radio, you'd hear that it could be a Category 3, 4, or 5 storm hitting the New Orleans area. Either immediately you panic and want to get out of town. We boarded up our house, but I did a vertical evacuation. We went up to a building on the Crescent in the Mississippi River where it bends, and weathered the storm in this high-rise. So I actually got the odd visual of seeing the Mississippi River flow backwards. And I shouldn't use the word flow. It was raging backwards, white-capped, an extraordinary natural phenomenon, breathtaking. And at that point, when the electricity was out, we went to the first floor of this building, and with a lot of families, weathered the storm out with the generator there. I had press passes, so I immediately started going around when the storm just left. There even a bit of a tailwind still in town, and I quickly saw a group of police officers with utter look of terror on their face, panicking, talking to each other, and they were saying that the canals broke and get the hell out of town. And at that point, I have a couple of young kids. I went around a little bit more, and then drove on Interstate 10 west, got my family to Houston, and then came back and started working the rescue boats, trying to get people out of buildings. So I saw corpses floating in the water. We saw a lot of people that particularly had diabetes or Alzheimer's, people that had mental illness all left behind. And I witnessed the fact that there was zero Red Cross in New Orleans. FEMA was blocking trucks from bringing water and food in.
I'm going to ask you because some people might think you're using a figure of speech. When you say there was zero Red Cross in New Orleans, there actually was zero Red Cross in New Orleans. And why was that?
Because the city's below sea level, and policy of Red Cross was never to have people below sea level because it would put the volunteers at risk. So Key West, for example, has no Red Cross. It's so vulnerable to hurricanes. In New Orleans,
so they headquartered themselves. They did bring some forces there, right?
Only
but they
outside
headquartered
of New
outside
Orleans.
of New Orleans.
You see, what happened is New Orleans got cordoned off, and the reason was the U.S. government came up with the policy: let's get all those people in the Superdome. Let's not bring in food and water. Let's evacuate them out, because once the looting started, they didn't want to start bringing food and water in, humanitarian things, because people would stay. So instead, it was basically let's starve and thirst them and get them out of there, which is the cruelty that took place during the week that I write about.
Had they had an evacuation ready, had those buses that basically drowned been where they should have been, an evacuation ready, that wouldn't have been a bad strategy, right?
Well, exactly. And the problem, though, was the Superdome, the so-called shelter of last resort, was not properly equipped. I was able to compare the Superdome to the Astrodome or the Reliant Arena in Texas. They have planned for this in Houston. New Orleans just didn't. And so you've got this horrible scene of a roof in the Superdome and over 20,000 people stuck there, the MREs disappearing, water scarce. In what I learned from writing this book, when you do rescue, you have what they call the 72-hour window. If you don't save somebody within 72 hours, you're going to get a lot of unnecessary death because people will die of heat stroke, people with heart problems will die.
People who need medication.
Medication, respirators. And that's what happened in Katrina. We lost that 72 hours. So in rescue and relief, it's about immediacy. And we didn't, as a country, and certainly as the state of Louisiana, we failed in this regard.
Okay, I'm going to do something here where I'm going to give you 3 quotes that I picked out in the book and just give me why you chose them and what they mean. And one is near the very top of the book. You quote Joan Didion in The Year of Magical Thinking. And it's a beautifully written quote, but I'm going to read it here. Confronted with sudden disaster, we all focus on how unremarkable the circumstances were in which the unthinkable occurred. The clear blue sky from which the plane fell, the routine errand that ended on the shoulder with the cars in flames, and the swings where the children were playing as usual when the rattlesnake struck from the ivy. It's beautiful. Why did you choose that quote?
Well, because I was reading her book, as a lot of the country was. It came out right at the time of Katrina, and so I had just acquired it and was reading it. It's a lot about grief, and it's a haunting little book, and it stayed with me. And it did strike me because even when I was boarding up my house before Katrina, it was very jolly. We were laughing, and the breeze is coming, and isn't it funny, the birds are leaving, and there's a nice smell that comes in when a storm's about to come.
You're right.
It blows out the pollutants.
And didn't you have an experience just recently where one veered off at the last minute?
Well, New Orleans is famous for dodging the bullet, although, we obviously have had horrible hurricanes, Camille in 69, Betsy in 65, just to name 2. But, there's not that feeling of just how bleak and bad it could really be when you're dealing with it. It just seems like, we live in a life. I remember when I was a kid, you get a snowstorm and it's all exciting. You get to stay home and it pulls people together. And there was certainly that feel in New Orleans on the eve of Katrina in the sense of people who stayed at bars, people were bellying up for a beer, and you had camaraderie that you were kind of gonna ride it out on.
Well, in LA, an earthquake will bring people together.
It does.
The common experience that we suddenly have. So let me read another one, which is James Lee Burke has written that New Orleans is an insane asylum built on a sponge.
I love that quote. I live there. One of the things I love about New Orleans as a great port city, but it's a city that tolerates eccentricity to a degree. Certainly parts of Los Angeles do, and San Francisco, but I'd say New Orleans might even be the king of eccentricity cities, and that's why I live there. It's so great, 24-hour bars and cafes, and anything that's loose in the world can tumble into New Orleans and float
down the river and end up in New Orleans.
Float down and call it home, but there's an insanity to it. Some of the humor of New Orleans has left me. It's no longer funny about politicians, getting payoffs and brown paper bags full of cash, or potholes in roads and no schools and lack of infrastructure. Because what you see with Katrina, it leads to death, it leads to misery, it leads to an underclass neglected. The very attitude of New Orleans of the big easy, let things go, which is so nice in our social life, is terrible when it comes to politics, because it leads to just massive, widespread failures in a time of crisis.
Right. Let me tell people you're listening to Free Forum. I'm Terry McNally. I'm speaking with Douglas Brinkley, best-selling author of Tour of Duty, and we're talking about his newest book. It's just come out, The Great Deluge, Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans, and the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And let me mention briefly here an organization in town that, because I know listeners sometimes go, well, is there anything I can still do, or who should I turn to at a time like this? One organization that I know has done a very good job is Operation USA, a local organization. They sent over $8 million in material aid, made over $750,000 in cash grants to Katrina. And you can learn more about their work at opusa.org. Okay, so that was the insanity built on a sponge. And then to describe actually the geographical or topographical or the vulnerability of New Orleans, you say New Orleans was no more stable than a delicate saucer floating in a bowl of water. Any turbulence in the surrounding water is bound to flood the saucer.
Well, look, it's below sea level for a city is a very serious reality. If you have places that are 12 feet below sea level and you're surrounded by water, the only thing that's saving you it used to be the wetlands and the barrier islands, but they're eroding and disappearing. We're losing 2 football fields of land a day in Louisiana, meaning every moment the Gulf of Mexico is getting closer and closer to the city of New Orleans. That's a big factor. And in those 100 years ago, Theodore Roosevelt, our great conservationist president, went to Louisiana, went to the barrier islands and said, these got to be saved, not just for bird rookeries, because they're great breeding grounds, but they're speed bumps. Hurricane hits these barrier islands if you pull it.
And it was one of his very first areas that he preserved.
It was the second bird wildlife, but he preserved it because he recognized that they were slowing the hurricanes down, that nature had provided these barrier islands. Well, now oil and dredging has destroyed the barrier islands in the Gulf of Mexico. And so these hurricanes now just whack right on, they hit shore instead of being slowed down by those speed bump islands. It's a big issue. Secondly, we built Lego levees around New Orleans. They were meant for Category 3 storms, and they were built, as we now know, by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in a very inefficient and, in fact, lethal fashion. And so they crumbled. I write about in the book the 3 main canal breaches: the Industrial Canal, London Avenue Canal, and 17th Street Canal. But the whole system's cracked, and we're talking about over a 300-mile levee system to keep New Orleans afloat. That's why you get a little angry at the Bush administration, because at this crisis point, as a country, we had to decide whether New Orleans is worth saving or not. Meaning, do we want to treat it like the Dutch have Amsterdam and Rotterdam and Den Haag? Do we want to treat it the way the Italians do Venice? Do we want to say New Orleans is a priority? We must save this great cultural mecca of our city. And the answer has been no. What we'll do is we'll do a patchwork job on the levees. We'll keep it at Category 3. We won't fix the whole infrastructure. We don't care about wetlands restoration. So it's basically a doomsday report for New Orleans in the future. question is when that moment will
Right.
occur.
In other words, I think you say that in New Orleans they always had said, and I suppose people in LA say the same thing, it's not if but when. We say it about earthquakes, I guess, and you guys had said it. And so it was when a big one would aim at you with what seems to be happening, linked to global warming, it appears, more storms, more intense storms. The likelihood goes way up, right? And yet even given both the lesson of Katrina and the information about last season in other hurricanes, they didn't take the extra precautions.
No, and there's still a kind of shrugging of the shoulders attitude in the Gulf South. People aren't sure what to do. I mean, take Mississippi, Gulf Coast. I write a lot about Mississippi in this book. The FEMA trailers are all there along Gulfport and Biloxi and Bay St. Louis. What do you do this August when the hurricane comes and you have trailers sitting on the coast? That's like flying shrapnel waiting to happen. That's the housing situation. People are living in FEMA trailer camps. So we're not really addressing the big issues, which is how can we buffer these storms by rebuilding the barrier islands and creating a levee system, at least for the city of New Orleans, to stop the flooding. Some people are moving away from the water's edge. I talked to a lot of hurricane specialists in writing this book, and every one of them, a couple don't agree that there's global warming,
or that there's a link.
They don't say the link. A couple, most, 80% think there is. But all of them believe that we're in for increased cyclonic activity because the Gulf of Mexico is heating up every year. Some people think it's from global warming heating up. Some think that it happens every 100 years, this heat up.
Okay. But it's happening, and the result
100%.
Will be.
There are going to be a lot more hurricanes smacking Florida in the Gulf of Mexico. Places that are very vulnerable, like Corpus Christi or Mobile or Destin, Florida, are in really they're in a real increased danger zone for next 18 years.
Wow. Okay, you write about FEMA officials preventing people from rescuing people, and we've heard that before, but maybe not in the detail you're going to provide us. FEMA also stranded 56 doctors on a Navy ship off of Gulfport rather than letting them go into places where they could do help. What were just a few, because then I want to get to the blame game. What were some of the most egregious and incompetent errors you found?
Look, FEMA's been getting beat up a lot because of their ineptness during Katrina. They were totally and utterly inept. That does not mean there are not a lot of good people working for FEMA. They are. Most of the people that I encounter working for FEMA are just hardworking people. They're trying to make a difference. What's happened is since Jimmy Carter created FEMA, it's been losing its mandate. It's been dumped into the Homeland Security apparatus, and it's the least. The Bush administration gives it the least amount of attention. It's basically viewed by the Bush administration as a feel-good post-Great Society program.
Oh my God!
They don't take
I can see that
as a serious.
So it's not about national security.
No, they deprioritize it, and
yet, isn't it true that when people rank the 3 most likely disasters in America, New Orleans hurricane's one of them?
Absolutely, it was San Francisco or California earthquake, a New York terrorist attack, and a flooding of New Orleans were considered the 3 on the eve of Katrina.
So the problems of FEMA.
So when it's easy to scapegoat Michael Brown, for example. He was a cronyism appointee by President Bush. He should not have had that job. But look, he got grounded by Michael Chertoff at Homeland Security in Baton Rouge. They wouldn't let Brown go anywhere. They wouldn't let him do anything. And what you find with FEMA is they were given this mandate, they not send our personnel in or people task forced into New Orleans because of the looting. That we don't want to get shot at was their fear, so we won't come in and help. So FEMA's, instead of being a action, quick response organization, stayed on the periphery way too long. And they basically, ironically, companies ranging from Home Depot to Walmart started trying to bring trucks of water and food in, and FEMA would stop them and say, look, you're not on our clipboard. What truck? Then they would search the trucks for bombs or something from a Homeland Security point of view to check to make sure that these weren't terrorist rescue trucks. So that's the mentality had gotten very warped. They were thinking everything post 9/11 and not hurricanes. Admiral Dewey, our famous admiral in the Spanish-American War, once said, I have much more fear a Caribbean hurricane than I do the entire Spanish fleet.
Yeah.
These are dangerous things,
that's right.
these storms.
And these are things which are going to happen, and you can't stop.
You can't stop, so you have to. It's about preparedness. And if I could just say one thing for listeners that's important, whatever town you live in California, you're talking about earthquakes, look into what your local emergency operations center is all about. I'd never realized that each city has this EOC to the degree that the mayor's in charge of your EOC, and then fire comes together. Does your local fire department know how to communicate with the police department? Do they know how to communicate with the hospitals? Do they have, if there's a blackout here in LA, or if you're in a suburb or a town here in Southern California, can you communicate with all these different groups? You're only going to be as good in an earthquake as your local emergency operations center.
And as you point out in the book, many were very good.
Many are very good, and many people did.
Certain towns came out this very. They were prepared. The
towns that were prepared did a lot better job, meaning they were immediately, look, there's an advantage of being in a city of 20,000 people compared to a big city, because you can know where your people that are ill are, or the seniors that are in this building. You get to know people. In a city size of Los Angeles, it's people are so anonymous. It's very hard because nobody will know who's being left where. So there is an advantage that smaller communities have.
And they did pull it off better, yeah.
And they pull it off better. And that's why I'm saying here, if you live in a town, whatever it is, try to. I used to make the jokes. A mayor. I'm the kind of guy. I mean, if I lived in Texas, I'd be voting for Kinky Friedman right now. But I do have to say, it did scare me a little to realize how important governors and mayors can be in a time of emergency. Their decisions that they make.
Well, especially when you're talking about these 72-hour windows.
Absolutely.
To dither or to be afraid or to calculate politically can really cost people's lives. Let me tell people again, you're listening to Free Forum. I'm Terry McNally, and I'm speaking with Douglas Brinkley. He's a best-selling author of several books, including Tour of Duty about John Kerry. His newest is the one we're talking about here, The Great Deluge, Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans, and the Mississippi Gulf Coast. You don't pussyfoot around in talking about the government failures. If you could briefly, we've got about 6 minutes left, and then I want to get to some heroes. Who failed, how, and how badly? Okay, we've already talked about Brown, shouldn't have been in the position. Chertoff was an obstacle because he had the wrong orientation. Who else? What about Blanco? What about Nagin? What about Bush?
Well, Chertoff I thought was the worst of all because he's supposed to be running Homeland Security. He pretended that the city of New Orleans wasn't flooding, and he went on the day of the storm to Atlanta to attend an avian flu conference. Completely he was advising President Bush terribly that we've got under control, Mr. President, everything's fine. And the fact that he's still head of Homeland Security is startling to me,
especially considering it's an important position.
Very important position. I'm not making judgments on his other parts of his job, but he definitely gets a 0 during Katrina.
Blanco?
Blanco was better than the public perception. She was awful on television, but she was the one who got the wildlife and fishery boats, the conservation boats, to New Orleans and saved the people from the Ninth Ward. She's also the Louisiana National Guard was positioned in the wrong place, but the Guard did a good job of trying to maintain order in New Orleans when things went chaotic.
She did. Didn't she at one point did she hold things up for a day at one point?
Well, people have claimed that, but she had a showdown with President Bush over states' rights versus the federal government.
Who should command the National Guard troops in Louisiana?
Yes. And all 50 governors of the United States, Democrats and Republicans, say Blanco did the right thing. A blame game was going on.
And she knew that if she gave them that would be, okay, now we've taken over from those incompetent Louisianians.
Exactly. And the truth is, for 5 days, there was no federal presence. It was Louisianans saving Louisiana and Mississippians saving Mississippi. So to suddenly turn them into the ones who failed, it's taking federal responsibility away. Now, the government did great. Our country did great by Saturday after the storm, which is now September 3rd.
Right.
So then the 82nd Airborne came in, and they started controlling the streets and getting things done, and you started getting medical supplies and proper evacuations. By Saturday, the convention center got emptied out. So President Bush did a terrible job during that week. He was totally detached, made a mistake of doing a flyover instead of putting his boot heels on the ground. Lyndon Johnson in 1965 went to the Ninth Ward when Betsy hit. In the middle of the night, he put a flashlight in his face and would say, "Hello, this is your president. I'm here." Now, that didn't help people, but everybody I talked to still talks about when Johnson came down there because he was telling these people They may have lost their home and they've lost a loved one, but we care as American people.
Different kind of Texan.
Different kind of Texan.
Okay, Ray Nagin, and before you tell me your analysis on him, he's been quoted about your book. I've heard the quote, totally bogus, a political hit, not worth the paper it's written on.
Yeah, I'm very hard on Mayor Nagin also, but I'm just telling the truth about him. Nagin delayed the evacuation of the city, then parked all of our buses, city buses, school buses below sea level. The mandate was when the storm comes.
Mandate from the evacuation plan.
From the evacuation plan is to get the buses out of town. He was on a labor dispute and would not pay the bus drivers extra wages. So
that it would have cost to move them out of town.
Cost him money. He didn't want to spend the money. Then, to make matters worse, he refused to ever speak to the people at the Superdome or the Convention Center. He holed up on the 27th floor of the Hyatt Hotel. He abandoned the emergency operations
he set up he was there for the setup of an emergency headquarters for the city, and then left as soon as it was set up.
He abandoned and didn't because he created his own Nagin operation because he didn't want to be there in the trenches. He never went out and worked on rescue boats or tried to make a visible presence during that week. So
and you also say, I think, that one of the reasons that you think he was delaying things was because he was torn between would it actually hit, but if we could keep from evacuating people, we wouldn't have to spend the city money, and it wouldn't hurt the tourist trade.
Absolutely. Because the hotels he was worried of the city getting sued by Ritz-Carltons and Hiltons, that he kicks out their packed convention business, the storm never hits, and then everybody yells at him. And that's what happens. If that storm didn't hit, people would have yelled at the mayor. But he had to take that,
and he had an election coming up soon.
You don't have that's so what I'm criticizing him during that 1 week of just lacking judgment and leadership.
Yeah. Okay. We've only got, my God, a minute and a half. Heroes. And where can people learn more about the heroes besides reading The Great Deluge?
Well, you'd have to, the Times-Picayune, if you get on the internet, and some of the stories they have are quite good, the local New Orleans paper, but a lot of them. I write about Reverend Willie Walker of Noah's Ark Church, who went in and saved hundreds of people, a group called the Cajun Navy, people just with recreational fishing boats that formed a citizens' navy and went out and saved hundreds of people. I write about a doctor, Ruth Berggren, who wouldn't leave 18 AIDS patients behind, insisted that they come with her, and they left this ward together after days of suffering. It's the stories of, I'm very critical of the New Orleans Police Department, but I focus on two police officers that did a very good job, on and on. And in the same in Mississippi, there's a hospital, Hancock County, Mississippi Hospital. The first floor totally flooded. The third floor roof blew off, but they had an open-door policy of not to turn anybody away, and so they took care of all the sick people during the storm.
Okay, so you can learn more about the heroes and the goats of Katrina and the lessons for it. The book is The Great Deluge, Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans, and Mississippi Gulf Coast. Thank you to D'Angelo Jones, my engineer, to Stan Mizrahi in production, Matt Perez in traffic, to you, my listeners. I look forward to being with you again next week. In the meantime, email me at temcnally, one word, TEMCNALLY, at att.net, temcnally at att.net, if you want to get on my weekly announce list or if you want CDs of past shows. If you want to hear this one you can hear it. It'll be up soon at temcnally.livedigital.com, and you hit the audio icon to get to that. I look forward to being again next week. Chris Anderson will be talking about the new shape of the entertainment and media business in the long tail. Thank you, Douglas Brinkley. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Hello, this is Terrence McNally. In the second half, you'll hear my 2005 conversation with National Teacher of the Year Rafe Esquith about a PBS documentary celebrating his Hobart Shakespearians, fifth graders at one of the nation's largest inner-city grade schools, who at the end of the semester perform a full-length Shakespeare play. Hello, I'm Terry McNally, and welcome to Free Forum. There's a phenomenon in the theaters these days, which most of you must know about, March of the Penguins. They're going to be the second most highest-grossing documentary in the history behind Fahrenheit 9/11. I think it may already have hit that mark. There's also another documentary I've been telling people to go see, Mad Hot Ballroom. And today I have with me the producer, director, and subject of a third documentary called The Hobart Shakespearians that's going to premiere on PBS nationally September 6th, and in LA on KCET September 9th. What I think links these three is that if you recall last year on the show, during the election season, I had a lot of other documentaries as features in the show. Most of them were political. And I feel that when people aren't getting the information they need in the mainstream media, they were turning to documentaries to get depth and context and things they weren't seeing. What I think about the Penguins, Mad Hot Ballroom, which is a ballroom competition in the fifth grade classes of New York City, and the Hobart Shakespearians, which is about a unique fifth grade class in the inner city of LA that ends up doing a full text Hamlet at the end of the year, is that these are documentaries about goodness, about dedication, about purpose, about treating each other well. And you know, whether it's Penguins or fifth graders, there's something in all of these. All of these three films have brought me to tears because there's something that just is so touching when we see the innate goodness of the life force in action and the life force with purpose. When there's so much wrong going on and so much against the life force, I think we as people need to see these things. So I advise you still, if you can find Mad Hot Ballroom to see it, you can obviously find the Penguin movie, March of the Penguins, the Hobart Shakespearians. Teaching in Los Angeles at one of the nation's largest inner-city grade schools, Hobart Elementary, Rafe Esquith leads fifth graders through an uncompromising curriculum of English, mathematics, geography, literature. The classroom motto is, "Be nice, work hard." There are no shortcuts. At the end of the semester, every student performs in a full-length Shakespeare play. Despite language barriers, not one of the kids in this particular documentary's family speaks English at home as their first language. But despite those language barriers and the poverty and the rough life that they are surrounded by, many of these Hobart Shakespearians move on to attend outstanding colleges. Rafe Esquith has very strong ideas about educating today's children of immigrants. He insists on expecting the best from these kids, no matter what their backgrounds are, and he backs up that expectation by giving them the educational resources to defy the odds. When as he says, if a 10-year-old who doesn't speak English at home can step in front of you and do a scene from Shakespeare, there is nothing he cannot accomplish. Here on Freeforum, we explore the lives, the work, and the ideas of individuals that I suspect hold pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. We look at new, innovative, provocative approaches to business, science, health, politics, environment, education, media, culture, spirit even, all based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. Now, before I bring on Rafe and Mel Stewart, the producer-director of the Hobart Shakespearians, I just want to deal briefly with what everyone else is dealing with, Hurricane Katrina. And I just wanted to mention a couple of things that are sort of in the background of this disaster. As you know, the hurricane has lashed at the Gulf Coast. At least 65 are dead. The damage is going to be in $20 to $30 billion. And let me just point out a couple of political lowlights that precede this hurricane. In March of 2001, 2 days after EPA Administrator Christy Todd Whitman's strong statement affirming George Bush's CO2 promise that he would limit CO2 and label it a pollutant, former RNC chief Haley Barbour, who at that point was no longer working at the White House but was soon to be elected Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour, he responded with an urgent memo to the White House. He had served as RNC chair, he had been a campaign strategist, and he was now representing the president's major donors from the fossil fuel industry. And he titled this memo, Bush-Cheney Energy Policy and CO2. He sent it to Spencer Abraham, Gail Norton, Don Evans, Andy Card, Nick Callow, all who had ties to either the auto or the oil industry. He did not pointedly send it to Christy Todd Whitman or Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill, both of whom are on record supporting CO2 caps. And Barbour wrote, a moment of truth is arriving in the form of a decision whether this administration's policy will be to regulate and or tax CO2 as a pollutant. The question is whether environmental policy still prevails over energy policy with Bush-Cheney as it did with Clinton-Gore. He derided the idea of regulating CO2 as eco-extremism and chided them for allowing environmental concerns to, quote, trump good energy policy. And on March 13th, Bush reversed his previous position, announcing he would not back a CO2 restriction using the language and rationale provided by Barber. And just last week, as Katrina was gathering steam looming over the Gulf, the Bush administration released new CAFE standards that actually encourage automakers to produce bigger, less fuel-efficient vehicles while preventing states from taking strong progressive action to reverse global warming. And at the same time, this month, a study published in the journal Nature by a renowned MIT climatologist linked the increasing prevalence of destructive hurricanes to human-induced global warming. So there's something, this is an editorial by Robert F. Kennedy in the Huffington Post called "They That Sow the Wind Shall Reap the Whirlwind." And you can learn more at www.stopglobalwarming.org. And to donate to Red Cross Disaster Relief, you can call 1-800-HELP-NOW. So just a point that the very person who advocated against limiting CO2 and against the fact that global warming might be a reality is now the governor of Mississippi, who will be appealing to us to help his city hit so hard by that hurricane. Rafe Esquith grew up in Los Angeles and attended the city's public schools. A 1981 graduate of UCLA, he's taught 5th grade at Hobart Elementary for over 20 years. He's won a Walt Disney American Teacher Award for National Teacher of the Year, Parent Magazine's As You Grow Award, Oprah Winfrey's Use Your Life Award. In 2003, he received the National Medal of Arts. He's the author of There Are No Shortcuts, Changing the World One Kid at a Time. And he's currently working with the NEA to help put Shakespeare in 10,000 American classrooms. Mel Stewart served as the main film researcher for Walter Cronkite's breakthrough series, The 20th Century. In 1960, he joined the David Walper Organization, and he produced and directed dozens of documentaries, including The Making of the President, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, 4 Days in November, and Wattstacks. He also directed features including Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the original Willy Wonka movie. His documentary credits include Man Ray, Prophet of the Avant-Garde, and Billy Wilder, The Human Comedy. His television work includes Bill, Ruby, and Oswald. He's been the recipient of 4 Emmys, a Peabody, and an Oscar nomination, and has also been president of the International Documentary Association. Welcome Rafe Esquith and Mel Stewart to KPFK and Freeforum.
Thanks for having us on.
Glad to be here.
My first question, always on Freeforum, is about guests' personal path to the work that they're doing. So let me start with you, Rafe. Why did you become a teacher, and why Hobart Elementary?
Well, I became a teacher because my father taught me that a life without service is a wasted life. I found I had a knack for teaching. I taught at a middle-class school for 2 years. Great kids, but they didn't need me. I was challenged by a principal to come to Hobart School, where there are 2,400 children, and I realized that we were a perfect match. These were kids who want a way out, and I figured out after many years of teaching a way to help them get out.
Okay. And Mel Stewart, what drew you to this documentary, to this subject, this teacher, these kids?
Luck. It's a very important part of being a filmmaker. You have to be lucky. And I was reading the paper. I saw that Rafe had won an award for teaching inner city school children, 5th graders, 9 and 10 years old, many good parts of a curriculum, but above all, it was teaching them how to do Shakespeare, and they had to put on a play every year. And I'm a Shakespeare nut, have been since I was 13 and saw Henry V with Olivier. So I called Rafe and I said, "What play are you doing next year?" And he said, "Hamlet." I said, "Perfect. That's the one I want to do." And I went to meet him, and somehow the chemistry was just right. I put my own money in, and I paid for the first shooting of the picture, and then showed the pieces to PBS in New York, NET, and POV, and they said, "Go, do it." And we were on the way. It took a year to finish.
Very good. Let me tell people you're listening to Freeform. I'm Terry McNally. I'm speaking with Rafe Esquith, inspirational inner-city LA elementary school teacher, author of There Are No Shortcuts, and Mel Stewart, producer-director of the Hobart Shakespearian. It's a documentary on Rafe's work, and it airs on PBS next Tuesday night, September 6th, with a difference in LA. On KCET, it airs Friday, September 9th. I tell everyone you should see this film. If you can't see it that night, tape it, TiVo it, or go to the PBS website and buy it. And you can learn more about the project and the film at www.pbs.org. And again, the name of it is the Hobart Shakespearians. I'm going to jump right back to you, Mel, because one thing you said struck me as reminding me of something I felt. The first thing that I saw when the POV said, "Do you want to, look into this as a subject for the radio show," was the Shakespeare play. Yet when I watch the DVD that you created about Rafe's work, the Shakespeare play is just one part of it. Were you surprised as well?
I was surprised. I went there. I'm going to do Hamlet. But it turned out, I found out they were doing baseball, learning to be American citizens, playing baseball. They were doing the most incredible books. Rafe was guiding them through the great books of our literature.
And these are fifth graders, remember?
Yeah, the fifth graders, all fifth grade reading Catcher in the Rye or reading Malcolm X, so forth, Huckleberry Finn. And you see the effect it has on these kids. And if they can do it, and they're just 9 or 10 years old, I only wish that my own children could have gone to Rafe's class. That's the only bad part of it. They didn't go, and they would learn. And the reason for the film is I want the whole nation to know what Rafe can do with children that don't have the background and the money that other children have in this country.
Absolutely. Rafe Esquith, teacher at Hobart Elementary. Tell me a little bit about that turning point you made that you mentioned in the film and in your book about when you went from realizing that you were a pretty good teacher, and you were a teacher kids liked. You'd won the popularity contest, but that you weren't making the difference you needed to make.
I mean, you're too kind the way you say it. The truth is, Terry, I was failing. Because the real measure of a teacher is not that the kids like him or that they do well at the test at the end of the year. The real measure are where are these children 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What am I giving to these children that they'll be using for the rest of their lives? And it was that night when I was really ready to give it up that my wife, Barbara, said, Rafe, you ought to reread To Kill a Mockingbird. And in Atticus Finch, I found the model that I was looking for. Because Atticus, and early in that book, when his children say, are we going to win? He says no. But he doesn't run from the courtroom. He goes in and fights the fight anyway because he believes strongly in Tom Robinson's innocence and he's going to speak the truth. Well, my classroom is that courtroom. And Terry, I feel all the time I'm a very ordinary human being. But what separates good teachers from other teachers is good teachers do not give up. I tell the children not to give up. That means I can't give up either.
Yeah, one of the things you say, again, it shows up late in the documentary, and I told a friend about it, was you say, I've won these awards, I've written this book, I get this documentary, I could make more money doing something else. And I've been here 20 years, you said, but for 20 years, I've been telling them this is important. And for me to walk away would be to be a hypocrite.
Well, we always say no child left behind. If I walk away, I do see a lot of teachers now who win an award or two, and they write their book and they get their website, and then they leave. So talk about no child left behind. They leave them all behind. I can't do that.
Okay. Tell us again some of the things, we'll talk about the Shakespeare, but some of the other things you do, because as I say, I'm going to say it several times through the show, I want everyone to see this documentary. But you have, it's basically, it to me looks like a totally unique world inside that classroom. What are some of the other things you've come up with over the years?
Well, we've created a different culture. It's a culture that's different from the neighborhood in which these kids live. It's a culture different from society. We do it through character development. We have the children really develop a code of behavior. Right now, I'm not in the classroom. I'll come back in an hour after I'm done talking to you. And the kids are behaving perfectly because they don't behave for me. And that's what a lot of children do. They please adults. But, I don't want them to please me. I'm a very small part of the story. The real heroes in this film are the children who have the courage to walk the path that I've laid out for them. And that means a push for excellence because our society doesn't value excellence. And I don't think excellence is a switch you can throw on at 3 o'clock. Hey, now it's Shakespeare time. Now we're going to be excellent. I want them to have a code of excellence in the way they approach their mathematics and their literature and the way they write and the way they speak in front of people and the way they play baseball and travel on the road. It's not a dog and pony show. It's a way of life in Room 56.
And you say, I quoted you that the things that are the most central to this are be nice, work hard, there are no shortcuts. That's really a very simple message. It isn't even make A's. It isn't even pass the standardized test. It isn't even play Hamlet. Where did you come up with that those few simple rules make all the difference?
It really came from one of my former students. Good teachers learn from their mistakes, as many young teachers do. I used to believe in my early days, hey, if a kid had high test scores or straight A's in algebra, hey, there's a great kid. Well, not necessarily. I used to find out years later that some of my students who I didn't think were my best students were the ones who were incredibly successful in college and life because they were mastering the skills of being nice and working with others. And I think the reason we don't teach those enough in school, they're harder to teach. You know, given the world in which we live, it's pretty easy to teach a kid his math. But teaching him to be nice in a neighborhood where people beat each other up and shoot each other is a difficult message to get across to children. But just because it's difficult doesn't mean that we as parents and teachers can't make the supreme effort to show them that there is another way to conduct your life.
If I were a young teacher at your school and I said, my God, you know, I walked through the neighborhood to get here this morning. I'm looking at what's around here. I'm looking at the way kids were out on the parking lot. How can you possibly do? How could I do what you do? Again, I'm trying to get like a couple little keys. How do you transform them? Why do they buy in?
Okay, first of all, lesson one, you are the role model. And you have to be the person you want the children to be. I want my kids to work hard, Terry. So I've got to be the hardest worker they've ever seen. It's not a question of preaching. I'm at that school at 6 a.m. That's right there. The kids go, my God, this guy is really going to work hard. I have to work hard. I don't raise my voice to these kids. I don't humiliate these children. I'm a tough teacher, but if I want them to be nice to each other, I better be the nicest guy they ever met. So rule number one, be the person you want the children to be.
Okay. Let me switch over to Mel for a second. That was Rafe Esquith, the teacher about whom the documentary Hobart Shakespearians is based on his classroom, where Mel Stewart, award-winning producer and director with the huge and honored career, chose to document, and it premieres on PBS Tuesday, September 6th, and in LA on KCET Friday, September 9th. You say this is one of your 2 or 3 favorite films. Quick question, what are the other 2 or 3?
Willy Wonka and Woodstocks.
Very good.
And maybe we throw in Man Ray.
Okay. Why is this one of your favorites in pretty stellar company?
Yeah. Number one, it is the most cinema verite film I've ever made because nothing was reenacted again. Everything was the only take. And Rafe has that incredible quality, which he's shy to admit. He can talk and walk at the same time. And in our business, it's very rare to find somebody who can go about doing what he's doing and yet talk to you and then do his business, and the kids don't care. The class goes on, and you have a tremendous sense of reality. I never had to ask Rafe a question twice. The right answer always came out of his mouth. Very rare. It's a very rare art, and to be able to do, and Rafe had it, so I knew right away we were on the right track. And there was no retakes, it's just the way it was.
How did you decide to have him speak directly to camera? I know that Frederick Wiseman, in his famous documentaries, doesn't do that. He just shows you what happens. But it's obviously a decision you made. Why?
No, he doesn't talk to camera, he talks to me.
Okay.
And that's very important.
Good.
I don't want him to talk to the camera because, first of all, it's a very hard thing to look at a camera and be yourself.
I understand.
So he always looked off from the camera and talked whatever thoughts he had. But most of the time, he's walking around the classroom and Rafe's walking this way and that way, and he just has a thought and he just hits me with it. But if he hit the camera with it, it would look false.
Thank you for pointing out my error. You're exactly right. So that this collaboration that the two of you are engaged in over a year includes moments where he's doing this and over his shoulder he goes, basically it's Mel.
Right, and it's the thoughts coming out of his head, but always on the nose, you know. And it's there was a moment when the kids, and we mustn't forget how important all the children are in this. I'm interviewing the little boy that plays Hamlet, and I say to him, what did you think of Huckleberry Finn? How was that? What kind of experience was that for you? He said, well, I thought the characters were interesting and they held a mirror up to nature. A 10-year-old Mexican kid, as part of his speech, has now used that as a phrase. It blew me away.
Yes.
It was just a wonderful moment for me.
Absolutely. Let me tell people that you're listening to Free Forum. I'm Terry McNally, and I'm speaking with Rafe Esquith, the inner city elementary school teacher and author of There Are No Shortcuts, and Mel Stewart, producer-director of the Hobart Shakespearians, which is a documentary on Rafe's work with these Hobart Shakespearians, these fifth-grade kids who none of whom their homes is English the first language, and at the end of this school year, they perform Hamlet full text, full character, and Ian McKellen visits the classroom. You know, it's nice to be in L.A. and have a reputation. Ian McKellen comes in, and he says that the great thing about these kids is that they understand what they're saying, every word. And he says, I can't say the same about all other Shakespearean actors. And I'm a former actor as well as a former teacher. And believe me, I know that's the truth. I wanted to ask you about one of the points you make even more in the book than in the documentary is the value of reading as like up there above. We've talked about how you're teaching to change their lives, but reading as well is something you find enormously important.
We have a wall of fame in my classroom where we have all the former students up who are in college now. And I tell the children there are a lot of different kinds of kids up there. There are jocks, and there are artists, and there are wild kids, and there are shy kids. But the one thing they all have in common is they all read for pleasure and they all read well. One of the things that's wrong with the schools today is that in trying to throw basal readers at the children, and they take all their tests and everything, has anybody ever asked the children how they feel about the reading program? The kids hate it. They despise the reading program. And yes, the companies will say, oh, but the test scores are going up. Their goals have to do with fluency and speed. My goals have to do with pleasure and passion and enjoyment. And when there's a scene in the film when the kids are reading Huck Finn and are absolutely in tears as Huck has to decide between heaven and hell.
Let me interrupt for a second. That is so powerful because you've just got a camera there catching a few of the kids, and they're in a school classroom. They're coming to a point in the book, and they cannot control themselves.
No, and that's what reading is supposed to be. So, we just finished Tom Sawyer, and to hear the kids hysterically laughing as Tom hoodwinks his friends into whitewashing the fence. This is why my class's reading scores are so high, because my kids love to read. They read all the time, and it's not because I'm such a good teacher. I put so many great books in front of them, we forget. Mark Twain's a great product. Children read him in the 1800s. It's not that I'm such a whiz. We've just forgotten there are so many great works of literature, and let's give the kids the benefit of the doubt with the right teaching and the right parents. They're going to read these books.
Yeah, and Mel mentioned some of them, but it is the autobiography of Malcolm X, To Kill a Mockingbird, Catcher in the Rye, things that most students, my guess is, might hit at 8th grade, probably high school. And you're just bringing them into 5th graders, and these are 5th graders who, most of them, as I said, in their home, most of them are either Asian or Latino, and in their home, English is not the first language.
Right, and there's a key to that also. When they do get thrown Steinbeck or Twain in the 8th or 9th grade and are told, go home and read this, many children are going to home environments where reading, it's just not conducive for reading. That's why we read these books together in the class. And when people say to me, gosh, Rafe, this takes a long time, I say, well, so what? I'm not in a hurry. That's when I say there are no shortcuts, that's for teachers too. We can't look for these simplistic solutions to complicated problems.
Tell the story of where there are no shortcuts comes from.
Again, I'm a learner, and I once took kids to the Hollywood Bowl to see the great cellist Lynn Harrell play. And Lynn loved my class so much, he pulled his kids out of private school in Beverly Hills and put them at Hobart. And one of his kids went on...
There's an endorsement.
Yeah, it was pretty funny to have these two white kids at Hobart. They were great kids. One of them wound up at Vassar and one of them wound up at Princeton. And they were still in touch with me all the time. But we went backstage to visit Lynn, and I had a young cellist who looked up at Lynn Harrell, who's 6'5". And the little kid said, I play the cello, Mr. Harrell, but it doesn't sound like that. How do you do it? And Lynn just looked down and said, well, there are no shortcuts. This is when I was in about my 5th or 6th year of teaching. And I said, boy, that encapsulates everything I'm trying to get across to these children.
Yeah, it's in a banner in the front of the classroom, and it comes up several times during it's something they know. And so when you go to it, it's almost like a tribe who has a certain set of iconic rules.
Well, I always, being in Los Angeles and loving basketball, I always used to tell the children, they call him Magic Johnson. There's nothing magic about Magic Johnson. This talented man worked for hundreds of thousands of hours in lonely gyms when there weren't people cheering him on to create that magic. There are no shortcuts.
Right. Let me ask, we've only got a couple of more minutes. Let me ask you a couple of questions. It seems to me that some of what you do might be controversial. You openly tell the children you want a better life for them than the one their school, their neighborhoods, the other kids in that school, perhaps even their families offer. There's a scene in the bus when you're on the way back from Washington, and you say, how many want to go back to Hobart? How many want to go back to your neighborhoods? You take them to hotels. You raise money through a nonprofit. You take them to hotels. You take them to good restaurants. What's that message, and do you get flack for it?
I don't get flack for it. As a matter of fact, I've got 60 kids showing up at 6:30 in the morning.
I meant flack from other teachers.
Flack from
or
other
politically
teachers.
correct folk.
Sure, I do. I teach with 125 teachers, and most of them are incredibly nice to me, and 8 or 10 of them believe I am the Antichrist. And that's okay. You know, the best teacher who ever lived here was Socrates, and they killed him.
Exactly.
So if they're not shooting at me sometimes, I'm probably not doing anything right. But I do want a better life for these kids, and surely to say you live in a neighborhood where you hear gunfire at night, this is not the best thing in their future when there are other children in America who don't have to go to bed with that. I'm just trying to level the playing field.
I'm going to throw out 2 things that we don't have time to ask you about. I'm just going to mention them, and then I'm going to go to the close. And one is you do this money system where they actually, when they come to school, they pay money for their seat. If you sit close to the front, you pay more to rent that seat. You get money when you achieve things. And if you are sick and miss a test, you're docked money because in real life you say, you know, there's no excuses, there's no shot.
It is play money. It's not real money,
Yes,
folks.
it's play money. And then you have auctions, but I mean, it's not real money. But there's that. And then, God, I can't remember the other thing that I was thinking of that was another wonderful thing that goes on there. But there's a sense of reality there that's phenomenal. So again, the book is There Are No Shortcuts. The POV film is The Hobart Shakespearian, airs on PBS next Tuesday night, September 6th, on KCET in LA, September 9th. That's Friday. To learn more, go to pbs.org/POV. Thank you to Zubri Fields, my engineer, Stan Mizrahi, and Mark Maxwell in production, Matt Perez in traffic. To you, my listeners, I'll be with you again in a week. In the meantime, email me at temcnally, temcnally @att.net, temcnally@att.net. If you have questions or comments, if you want CDs of old shows, if you want transcripts, or if you want to get on my weekly announce list telling you who's going to be on and what we're going to talk about. You've been listening to Freeform with Terry McNally. Thank you, Rafe Esquith. Thank you, Mel Stewart. Keep up the good work. Watch this documentary.